What if Sam discovered he's a Nephilim with Gabriel as his father? Stanford University was supposed to be a fresh start for Sam Winchester. A chance to escape the shadow of hunting, of family drama, and endless nights on the road. But as he walks across campus, something nags at him, an unsettling feeling that's become harder to ignore. And then it hits him, a truth so wild it sounds like a bad joke. Sam Winchester, the fledgling hunter with dreams of a normal life, is no ordinary human at all. He's a Nephilim. And his father? The trickster angel Gabriel. Just as he processes this shock, Sam's life takes a turn he never could have predicted. Gabriel isn't just a shadow in his past. He's back in Sam's life, ready to awaken the powers lying dormant inside him. And with heaven and hell both eyeing him from the sidelines, Sam's days of quiet college life might be over before they even began. Sam growled, deeply, in the back of his throat, an atavistic call, and the reverberation of thin breath echoed around the tight, air-stilted bedsit. Despite the cramped atmosphere, tensions rang high and clear, like a bell echoing in a secluded, patioed courtyard, dings resounding off cobbled stone. The walls compressed as breath burst, heated, and the air seemed to redden with carnality and taking the tone from the depths of the desire between heated thighs and slippery, pink lips. Slick sweat steamed intoxicatingly to wetted noses, congealing across the mingled somas and mangled bedsheets, swimming sluggishly through the thickening atmos of the studio apartment. Sam grasped the tip of Daniel's tongue between red lips and sharp, light teeth, as the man beneath his frame gasped out his non-verbal agreement. The light through thinned windows was dim, regardless of the time of day or season, but in the beginnings of the death of autumn, at the brink of the breadth of the evening, thinning grayed and whitened light, like bleach on the sullen, dinky apartment was more apparent in its loneliness. Color was slowly sapped, as all Daniel's items, personal though they may be, seemed washed out in the chilling light, whitewashing the entire scene, save for heated red and lustful orange spilling across the bedspread, from Sam's only personal object, a nightlight. It had been years since he could sleep without one, yet as long since he was permitted such a childish frivolity. Thank the eldest Winchester for that conundrum. The subtle lapping of tongues, and grunts of voices, overcome beyond speech, were slowly mingled with the scratchings of fabric as Sam's thick, distressed Levi's caught on the soft fabric of Daniel's joggers as he undulated, pressing in a grinding movement between the unbearable restriction of clothes between the two, due to both's insistence. No sex. Sam had rented out the apartment nearly a month ago, middling lateness of the October. Now, aside, he knew he should have perhaps settled more thoroughly. Even with the ostensible heat of Stanford, and the general campus, and surrounding student villages and accommodations, he seemed to take time to warm to his new situation. Daniel, a new med student who was perhaps more interested in the biomedical foundations of psychology than the intrinsic physiology of these seminars, had essentially become the dominant species of the apartment, after moving in nearly 3 weeks previous to this lazy, tense afternoon, after entering Sam's life in a twist of events even he couldn't unravel. Or perhaps, he was simply waiting too much to parse a reason for interest, allowing the first month of his law education to drift over him like a summer's storm, or the steady pull of a warm, swallowed riptide. Sam could see Daniel everywhere, all over the bedsit, not just in memories that perhaps made him flush more than he'd be willing to admit to his academic peers, but in everything that comprised the apartment. His toothbrush, his frying pan, his sheets and comforters spread across the sofa, custom furnished with the apartment, his drawers, socks, exam mock papers, throw pillows. All washed to a subtle, nugatory-tinged gray by the light filtering through the aged, dust-stained window. Daniel seemed so meshed with the place, in such a manner Sam couldn't quite fathom, as he bit the man's lip and worried it between two gentle teeth, eliciting a thought-muffled groan Sam could barely hear as it reached his ears. He hadn't paid for any part of the apartment, with Sam the only member muddling through a job, at the cost of Daniel's mental health at stake from both pre-medical school and the risk of purposed job insecurity. Sam had no real complaints, honestly. However, he'd be more of a liar than was already ingrained into his very personhood if he said it didn't make his gut twinge at the jealousy of Daniel's ease of relaxation, as incomparable to perhaps his own detest for such careless things as loosening hackles, or becoming too soft in one's environment to examine for dangers. He nuzzled his physical affectations into Daniel's soft-skinned neck, as his eyes washed over the apartment again, from his point of vantage at the seat of the bed, feet resting just near the pillows and backboards as he pushed Daniel with efficient, practiced gentleness against the foot of the bedsheets. His eyes strayed once more to the bleached, white door. He knew he made the professors, usually impassive to the slight detailedness that state school teachers were trained to pick up on in troubled students, were unnerved by him. Far from restless, he was unnaturally still, even for a young, adept law student at such a privileged school, almost preternaturally aware of all exits and points of observance, with trained, eagled eyes that never strayed from intended targets for long, even if this was so menial as a scratched blackboard used for note-taking during law theory classes. He could be uncomfortable, both in his own broken and stitched skin, as he was in any given environment, seeming too loose and too constricted, simultaneous, and never loosening his guard for more than a moment. He knew this could make others, his peers, elders, uncomfortable, and he tried not to let that affect him in any meaningful way. He was almost lost at that moment, not, unfortunately, in the movement, the drag and pull of fabric, caught and tense as it was against his most private physicality, and the person breathing heavily, even through short constrictions and relaxations of his diaphragmatic muscle, below him, but once more in his thoughts, letting the rest of his experiences concurrently wash away from his attention, like water slipping from oil-coated feathers. Daniel grunted once, then once again below him with a tenseness to his traps that Sam could feel even between fabric, before relaxing significantly into the bedding below. Sam couldn't honestly tell if he had climaxed, or had simply given up on doing so through such a restrictive nature as their intimacy was forced to. Sam couldn't find it within himself to honestly care either way. Muscles and movements stopping within Sam's actions without a moment's hesitation, no slowing down or gently stopping, just an immediate cessation to perfunctory affection, and he gazed down at his lethargic-eyed lover. Or, perhaps disillusioned. Sam had never been the best read. "Baby," the man beneath him whispered on hushed breath, strained with forced emotion, as he pushed relatively dry hair from Sam's cheek to the crook behind his spotlessly clean ear. "I can feel you slippin' from me." Sam squinted his eyes in the low light, although both knew that was not the cause, and twisted his head in a confused expression, needn't hair falling once more from its intended resting place. Daniel sighed beneath him, and pulled back his hand as if it was never meant to rest against Sam's cranium, regardless, and slid both hands under his own head with his elbows forming inequality signs around his own ears, against sweat-matted hair. His Louisiana accent was thick against the mingled exhaled breath condensate, fogging the room against the chilled air creeping outside the thin window pane. "I can see you ain't focused, Samsa," letting the nickname curl over his motion-heated tongue, and the words flowed like ice blocks between them, lapping at the seas of false tranquility Sam was attempting to exude. "I want to be focused, Danny," he whispered, tasting the lies as they came out. Daniel's face mirrored what he assumed was his own inconceivably unsubtle expression of discontent and disbelief. Sam felt the need to back up his shallow words, hollowly lingering in the space between the two, echoing over the apartment that screamed of Daniel and whispered of Sam. "I'm not used to this. Sharing, that is, not sex." He let the words hang between the two. It wasn't sex, not honestly. It was barely intimacy, even on an emotional level, frothing and grinding mindlessly, distantly, between the two. Always separated by something. Lord knew, however, he'd been experiencing sex-adjacent activity for far too long with relative strangers for it to be strictly appropriate, however. His brother lost his virginity at 13. He hardly had the greatest role model. "It's for Taja, most, Samsa," Daniel smirked, humorless, copying his thoughts, accurately to an uncomforting degree. "And it ain't just 'cause oh ma papa and mama. I knew they'd approve of a man in a relationship me. Or, what with homosexuals, and all of it. Liberal propaganda, they'd term it. Blame it on the college. Pull me out o' med school." His lips twisted at the statement, dark skin growing paler than the dim gray light had even bleached him. His tension, worry and shame, brewing at the core of his being, was palpable. Despite it all, Sam gazed down at the intelligent, socially competent man lying stiffly below him, and tried to care about him. He drew blanks. Sam tried to make his heart constrict in worry, jealousy, miserable rage, anything, at the statement as it related to him. He was disappointed to pull nothing, except perhaps the wince as his scars, healing neatly beneath his nipples, were tensed by the force and compression bandages. Daniel's coiled, curly hair was rustled and twitched beneath him, as he pulled his hand from under his head, and gently lay the fingertips and palm with a slightly screwed hand just on the bridge and beneath his pectoral, through the thin shirt and medical protection that separated him. "It ain't exactly shame, Samsa," he repeated, tensing his fingers over the spot, skimming sensitive areas in a way Sam assumed must be intentional, as light diffused across the area between his face in light and shadow as Daniel twisted his head in determined movements. "And it ain't this, either. The dysphoria, or whatever you call it." The stitches still seemed fresh between them, only woven into his skin a little over a month ago. Checking out straight from his motel in Texas with his father and brother to an impromptu visit in hospital in California with enough bartered money for a swift, no questions asked chest transition he assumed was tinged with some illegality, from a doctor he was sure was on the brink of already losing his medical license, 2 weeks resting on sterile sheets on his back, and straight to the accommodation, a mile-and-a-half walk from Stanford University. The intangibility of the situation seemed to settle in him, transience of his current life as palpable as the still, concerned face before him. More so, even, at a strong likelihood. This ain't about me, and it ain't about you not wanting to see your vulva, or whatever. Sam tensed at the medicinally accurate language, but what else can one expect from a biomed student? It's about you not being comfortable. Me. People. Anyone. I know how you ditched Brady the moment he prodded too much into you. It ain't about my relationship issues, Sam. Sam noticed the drop of the obvious nickname with distant attention, still pressing his hands either side of Daniel's torso to keep himself suspended over him, in the dull atmosphere of the room around them. Sam played into the hand that always accommodated to him, always cared, denial. I won't pretend to know what you mean, Daniel, he said with terseness he normally only saved for monsters and the supernaturally like. You can't keep putting off fucking just cause of your surgery, Sam, Daniel said with a twisted expression. If you ain't putting out, I might be out. Daniel sighed lightly, reconsidering his explicit words, with a pinched finger between the tear ducts on either eye. I'm a teenager, Sam. We're both horned up, restless 18-year-olds. I just started college. I ain't starting it off with a dry spell, and I know you ain't want to, either. I'm trying to get over my issues with it, Sam. Why ain't you? Daniel added, scowling. Sam noticed distantly that Daniel's member was still hard, rock-like, between his thighs. Sam, despite everything he was spitting at Daniel, and Daniel was returning like a hot grenade in a convoluted game of hot potato, sneered back, ruthlessly, still warm and full between his own thighs. Sam gripped Daniel's hand, moving his weight onto one elbow, between tense, tight fingers, but then lightly brushed it aside from his own chest. I'm not doing this again, tonight, Danny, Sam murmured between clenched teeth, and rolled off of Daniel with a swift movement, taking one more look at the apartment that wasn't really his, before rolling back onto the bed, with his head on a pillow that felt borrowed. Daniel slowly worked his way up next to him, grunting lightly at the jostling to his sensitive member the entire time. Tomorrow, then. We'll discuss it tomorrow. I don't want to put too much pressure on you, Sam, but the way we entered this relationship, the fact you gave me a key. I assumed I'd be getting it more than this, Sam. Sam gazed at the popcorn ceiling with a glare that could have set it ablaze. Avoidance, Daniel echoed, like he pulled it straight off one of the pages of his biopsychology journals. Avoidance my ass, Sam murmured, rolling over on the bed, stopping to kick of his jeans in a frustrated huff before he settled, still vertical. I still care about you, Samsa, he whispered, as Daniel crossed his arms over his own chest, and breathed out heavily into the night air that now seemed more chilled, much like the atmosphere outside. I care about you, too. Sam moped his expression into the pillow, hoping to God that that statement was truthful, as the air thickened between the two like a dense fog, and they slowly, individually, fell into a stilted, uncomfortable sleep. In the start, it was almost inconspicuous. One person that showed up late and sallow, itchy with nervousness to one lecture, and then never again. A word, or two, in the school paper. Spots too crimson to be sangria spotted on steps leading to uni apartments. Unrelated, these could all be incredibly easily explained, with only a whisper of incredulity. Stress from Ivy League schools leads to early dropping. Rumors were common amongst even older teenagers, and explanations for the smallest things get exacerbated by college journalists, atrophying at their desks with nothing enrapturing. College parties with more cherry sours than strictly sane nor safe. But, coagulated, as they were, into a thick paste of tension and anxiety in Sam's overactive brain as they were, these facts weren't as easy to swipe under the metaphorical rug of opted ignorance. He parsed these pieces of information, and tied them, braiding each incident through his knowledge like a skilled artist as he sat at the musty, old table in Stanford Library. The smell of old books was overwhelming, filling his awareness with more sensory awareness than he strictly knew what to do with, and settled with tucking his ears gingerly between his shoulders to block the overpowering sounds of crinkling pages and hushed, rabble conversation. He thanked to God he somehow still had an inkling of belief in, and flicked through some books, reeking of the musk of 1,000 fingerprints, as he thumbed through information that he had edited up at one of the most research-saturated institutions since the Alexandrian Mausian. He tapped absently at a laptop to his left, and scrolled through information to his right on analog documents, as he flicked his eyes back and forth across the seas and pillars of endless, red, cerulean and emerald leather-bound books, surrounded by cocoons of maple and ash wood. A sense of peace settled into him, before he glanced once again at his notes, and questioned what his mind had come to, with irrefutable proof, even if he was sure such a thing was incapable of existing. A vampire. Or, a pack, at an informed reason. The idea did not fill him with confidence. He packed up quickly. He wasn't in a creative writing class. If anyone saw a table filled with folklore journals, notes and scribbles on vampires and possible modes of termination, it was unlikely they would be very accommodating of any of his excuses. Shoving all of his notes and laptop into his open-latched bag with one wide swoop, he quickly stood and made his way out of the main campus and back to his apartment. What he met wasn't a sight he would have wished to experience. Daniel was sat on their bed, kicking his feet as he relaxed against the headboard, scrolling through his med seminar notes. He was resolutely ignoring Sam. Sam clicked the door behind him shut once more, and slowly, silently, descended onto the settee in the center of the living room area of the singular room. He made himself busy reorganizing his notes across the kitchen-living room table, low as it was and stained already with brown, sticky, earth-scented smudges, and quickly rose to make coffee. He flinched as the kettle flicked on, stowing urges to look back at Daniel every other second, resolving himself to occasional glances. He sighed his relief when it bubbled to a stop, and poured it, himself, into the French press, and eased the plunger down to the lid, pressing his lips tightly at the implications of the movements. He flicked his eyes over to Daniel, who was turning his head rapidly away from him by the time Sam had glanced up. Sneaky bastard was watching, then. He flicked his phone out of his pocket and opened the flip section. He thumbed through, scrolling down at his contacts until he found one that had been recommended to him through a friend through Bobby maybe 2 months before his rapid departure for the throes of academic literature. Despite his thrill of adrenaline and the rush of freedom the entire event brought, his hunter mind was slowly languishing in the absence of any real case or intellectual stimulus. He mentally apologized to Stanford U, despite devouring most of the current content months before his actual application. And even his most rebellious instincts or stern hunter friends couldn't deny him this sliver of adventure, surely. Regardless, his moral compass would abhor him standing around, metaphorical dick in his hand, unwilling to aid whoever was being victimized by the vampires. He sipped at his thick, disgusting coffee and winced, remembering who had bought the pack and glaring at the toes of his trainers, kicked as they were at the foot of the bed. Of course, his romantic partner had to have the same caffeine taste as his elder brother. His finger hovered over the "call now" button, and he tensed as he licked his bottom lip with a quick swipe of his tongue. He contemplated calling the number swiftly, connecting to the bar into Nevada and being done with it, fully immersed into the hunting life once more. He rubbed a sweaty thumb over the button, waiting to depress it, before ramming the thing lightly against his forehead and groaning. Why were no decisions in his life easy? He decided to take an easier, if no less fraught choice. He sidled over from the kitchen area to near the bed, and crossed his arms over the thickly muscled portion of his chest. "Daniel," he said, calling the attention of the other man, hiding conspicuously as he was on the bed. He slowly started to cover his face with the laptop. Sam snapped him over the ankles with a light knuckle, and the man shot up, glaring before it disappeared into a slight smirk. Daniel blinked up at him like he hadn't been aware of his presence before that moment. "Oh," he hummed, with all of the acting talent of a Hallmark actor. "Sam, home so early?" Sam rolled his eyes softly, and grabbed him by the one hand, dragging the man gently upwards as the laptop fell with a small thump to the comforter on the bed. He held Daniel's hand in between the two lightly, before lowering it so they were joined closer at the hip. "Daniel, I know I've been insensitive," he began, flicking his eyes up to garner a reaction. The man hummed his acknowledgement, letting Sam speak his part first. Dan, I don't know if you know how tiring it is for me to use that, part of my anatomy. It makes me feel queasy, like something is abnormal. It's sort of like looking at a pimple on your ass the size of a tomato, to be honest. Or sticking your hand in a dirty dishwater basin. It's deeply uncomfortable to try and do like missionary or vaginal or whatever. You think my dick looks like a tomato pimple?" Sam wheezed, and pushed his chest lightly. "No, God, I hope you aren't being serious." Sam snorted, but continued as planned. "Sometimes it's hard even doing it on my own, because I have to look at it, you know? I have to see it and experience everything, and it just makes me much too aware of my own anatomy to feel fully comfortable. Do you understand what I mean?" Sam sighed, brushing a hand through his thick, dark brunette shag of hair. "It's not that it's not pleasurable, or that I don't specifically want to have, sex with you, but it's these two parts warring. Like, Luke versus the Empire." "Look, Sam, you're all kinds of cute," Daniel said, gazing up into Sam's deep, hazel eyes, and rubbing his pulse point with the callus-free pad of his thumb, so soft compared to Sam's own. "A scholar from birth, with a New Orleans accent to lose feeling in one's toes for, but you're crazy if you ain't think I ain't gonna be respecting you and doing sex how you wanna do it. Alright, share." "Yeah," Sam said with false bravado that he had learned from his brother. Daniel seemed to accept it easily, as he brushed his free palm along Sam's cheekbone, and Sam leaned directly into the skin. "Hey," Daniel said, stopping the touches for a moment as he pulled slightly back, and Sam tried hard not to feel a tad stung. "Did you just reference Star Wars to explain a sex metaphor?" Daniel asked, screwing up his face, before he brushed his lips against Sam's, and they chuckled lightly. "Heckin' nerd." Sam pushed more deeply against him, and moved his hand to undo the buckle on his own trousers. Daniel quickly caught his hand, and flicked his eyes back up at his face. What was that, Sam?" I thought you wanted to have sex to cement the relationship. You know, like you said last night. Otherwise, you'd step out," Sam explained easily, and Dan sighed heavily, before seating himself on the crumpled bed, whilst Sam stood in sullen shock. I was wrong, to toy with your consent like that, Sam," he said, voice heavy with apology. Sam's heart sunk. "I contemplated it, and I had a chat. Advice. From a friend, this morning, Samsa. I'm sorry. I should have respected your space and boundaries more." "Dude. That was like, so genuine. Bruh, can you just be serious for a moment and accept my apology?" Daniel snapped, and Sam soothed with 2 downward hand motions. "Right, I get it. And you're just glad you quoted the trilogy, just 'cause that prequel sucked some serious ass. We would have had a whooping if you quoted Jar Jar." "Misa thinks not," Sam said, straight-faced. "Boy," Daniel barked at him with an upturned finger, and both settled after a moment of snickering. Daniel curled in on himself a little more, and then said in a more subdued tone, "That don't mean we ain't got some serious issues, Sam. I meant what I said about the secrets. And the whole ma and pa on homosexuality approval thing. Just, man, I think we stick it out for now, and see which way it goes. If we're both still happy, sure, cool. But if we don't make some serious changes." "No, I get it, man, I get it," Sam said, rubbing a hand across his face that was still damp with sweat. "Look, I got some work to do, but I understand. We'll see if we can resolve," he gestured between himself and Daniel, "this. But if not, cut our losses and run? Not a casino, dude. Yeah, just heavy, Samsa. Bit heavy for a Monday morning, share." "Yeah, I know. See you soon, Danny," Sam said, stepping back. "And get to work on your med notes," he said, rubbing his eyes with a sleeve. "Don't wanna forget if the femur goes in the arm of the cranium and end up failing med school. It's a thigh bone, Sam. I knew that," he said, as he backed up and away from the conversation. When Sam was back in the safe, nearly secluded space of the living area, with a quick check ensuring that Daniel had now slipped on a pair of heavy-appearing headphones, plugging the jack into his travel Walkman. He quickly slid out his phone again, and resolved to press the button, holding it as he took another quick sweep around his room. Still, it was so gray, despite the lack of early evening light sweeping the room with such a shade, and, despite his leather satchel and table stuffed with his hunting and vampire notes, nothing in the area particularly caught his eyes, nothing to hang on to. Nothing of his. Not for the first time, he was caught by the sense that this wasn't his own living room, but one in an IKEA set, not quite home, or human. Certainly not one lived in. Not by him, at least, he thought, eyes drifting over the still, focused figure of Daniel, and tried to feel as though he hadn't let a stranger into his home, tricking Dan with a facade of normality. The thought clenched at his stomach, as he slid back to sit next the counter behind him that felt like a prop, like a faux show of suburban, civilian life, and tried to hang on to his sense of sanity before the final rings rang out. Non-subjectively, it was answered fairly quickly. "Hey, someone called for the doctor." A voice that sounded medicated called from the other end of the line. Sam screwed his eyes shut momentarily in confusion, leaning his head back against the counter cupboard. No, I didn't call a physician's office. Is this the wrong number?" Samuel. "Oh, a mind so small and frail. Dr. Badass into the house," he said, appearing to yell directly into the microphone at the base of his cellular, and Sam screwed his eyes in indignation to the noise. Sam jammed one finger into his opposite ear to drown out background interference, and chuckled back. "So, it appears I got the right number after all," he said smoothly. "That's right, Bazatches. The doctor called," sounding sincerely like he had had his sinuses permanently destroyed by party drugs. "I, got this case, DOCT Dr. Badass," Sam said, trying fervently not to snicker over his present situation, and this is gonna sound insane, I think could probably be vampires? Dr. Badass snorted, but not in a way seeming to be derisive to Sam. More so, knowing, if that made sense to his stress-addled brain. Perhaps it did. He had survived a month at Stanford in a fraught relationship with his boyfriend, after all. Perhaps a doomed one. Nar, bruh. If you think you've got a vampire, it's because you definitely got a vampire, brah. Nothing else hunts like him. Sam squinted his eyes when something resounded over the line that sounded exactly like someone absent-mindedly picking their nose and flicking it. So, it is a vampire? Sam whispered, like the word was filthy, in an almost smutty sense. Like, he wouldn't want to say it in front of a priest or his parent. He had been drilled into that vampires veritably and thoroughly were nonsense, nincompoop. He remembered being laughed out of a Chili's once for suggesting such a conclusion to his brother at 13, when the thing had turned out to be a ghoul after all. Well, they're like, awful rare these days. But, trust your instinct, man, you know? Like, live and let evil bloodsuckers not, right, man? And Sam had a distinct sense, despite his growing irritation at the voice over the phone line, that it had been wise to not call Bobby. Engaging in a conversation like this with someone he loved would have been the end of his mortal trip on Earth. He didn't think he could manage such revelations with someone whose opinion he respected. No disrespect to Dr. Badass, however, of course. How'd ya, kill him? Sam asked, in a way he hoped was light and non-judgmental. Solid swing to the neck, brother, Dr. Badass piped up, decapitation, like that stuff that took out old Queen Bee and Queenie H. snicked SNICT, you know what I mean? Hey, you have a katana? No, Sam said, mentally cataloging the useful information despite wading through all of this verbal bullshit. Isn't that like, the Wolverine comics noise? Looks like we got a geeky sage in our midst. He, oohed, and Sam felt a growing tension ache either side of his nose. And, yay, bruh. Just, off with their heads, and that should do it. Also, brah, they tend to sleep at day, be up at night, but sunlight only irritates them, man, won't kill them. And they can wake up if you attack while they're asleep. Also, dead man's blood is like pepper spray to him. Do you have any of that on you? Sam squeezed tighter between the either side of his nose cartilage, not on such short notice. It would be way too risky to try and break into a morgue in the beginning of the day, and, if he waited another night, they might have the opportunity to kill again. Thanks, man. That's really helpful. No probs, Sam my dude. The doctor called from the other end of the phone. I owe ya one, Ash, Sam said, making his thumb move to the end call button. Oh, one more thing man, don't go aloe, beep, whoops. Whatever it had been, he probably would have heard it if it were important. He pushed himself off the floor, wiping the thin layer of dust off the seat of his jeans. He better set off now if he wanted any hope of nabbing a sword and finding a nest of vampires by the time dusk set upon Stanford. Eyes trained by the darkest the Norveger had to offer, trained the slouching students with a glint to their eyes, that a suspicious individual might have deemed yellow. Some might have thought of her as a professor. Others, a kobold or a servant of Surtur, the god of fire, natural force and immense destructive forces. She was also a barista on 2nd Street, outside a set of dinky little apartments in Palo Alto, as he was a junkie hiding under a section of the pier leading to one of the adjoining California beaches, as they were a crow leaning hesitantly over a lamppost, grinning glinting little eyes in the steaming heat and spiking light of a Stanford City afternoon. They cawed, he tickled at his inner elbow with a rubbing knuckle, and she kept a keen eye on a certain individual, apathetic to her advances as he was, but followed him with the tracking skills of the great wolf, regardless. They kept all of their eyes fixed on Samuel. Sam Winchester, almost 20 minutes later, was in a sticky pawn shop, towering with teetering walls of various, once beloved items, before survival won out over the nostalgia of trinkets and knickknacks. He was sure he felt nauseous when he saw a wedding dress hanging up in the corner, bedazzled with what appeared like a poorly bleached bloodstain. He huffed to himself, and cleared his throat before advancing on the adjoining desk, his throat feeling thick with the moisture in the air, combined into an uncomfortable slurry with his trepidation at getting back in the field. Remembering back to when he had last had a conversation with Daniel, even this filled him more with goosebumps, add nerves, prickling along his spine and pinning the flesh along his arms to a sullen chill. He wasn't sure if it was better to claim ignorance, much like he had done last night, leave it all to the wind, let nature be nature, including whatever it was that went bump in the night with too many teeth and fewer inhibitions. He knew that taking this step would be ringing the death knell on whatever future life of normality and white picket fencing he had intended to set up with Daniel, maybe someone else, or whatever he had said to the man that morning that suddenly felt as if it was slipping through his fingers like chilled ashes. Maybe all of his security was destined to end up in the flames of his youth, set ablaze in that tire fire of a childhood he had kept stoked since his 6th-month mark. His mother had burned. His future doing the same seemed almost predestined. This was the longest he had gone since 9 years old without a case. If he entered back in, like an itch to scratch, or an addiction he would continue to claim he had full control over, like a beast in its cage, he knew he wouldn't be released unscathed, if he ever was at all. Before another thought crossed his mind, his hand slapped on the desk in front of him, calling the attention of the shop clerk, if in a mildly startling fashion. The man behind the counter blinked red-stained eyes at him. Whether from sleep deprivation or oregano indulgence would have been harder to tell if not the detoxifying scent of skunk radiating off the man. He almost looked like if a college student had been stuck in a party for 10 years, nutritionally deprived, strung out, and reeking of the 90s. Sam glanced up, blinking at the sword hanging in what he had to assume was a semi-precarious position, behind the man's head. He slowly tried to regain his footing. Is that the Kandarian dagger from Evil Dead? The man in front of him seemed to be struggling to trudge through the haze of kush surrounding him like a plant-smelling aura. Yeah, replica, actually, fairly accurate. Interested? Sam had known, as there always was, someone with a fantasy sword collection too large to manage eventually had to relinquish some, be it to eBay, or a friend, or a pawn shop or whatever, and thought the chances of finding one to be higher than strictly necessary. He had expected one from the Lord of the Rings books, considering the movie in the works soon, or Excalibur or, hell, even a machete that they could consider a knockoff from some Friday 13th flick. This, however, he hadn't expected. How accurate? Well, it's metal, sharp, pointy. Doubt it's the couple centuries old that Bruce Campbell and Noby claims, but it'll, cut shit. Sam asked for the price, gawking slightly at the price tag, hitting nearly $100, but biting the bullet anyways. It was short notice, sharp, and long. He hadn't expected much, but he genuinely had nothing else to do the job with. Got yourself a deal, pal. What are you gonna do with it, kill deadites? Sam smirked. Near enough. Sam questioned around, mostly freshers out of their depths with courses that assumed friends were in the same boat, disappearing as fast as they had entered the course. No evidence of cattle mutilation, doubtful, this far towards both San Jose and Francisco, but relevant nonetheless. No EMF, in areas far enough away from cell towers and pylons for that to actually be useful, and live victims, not flight risks. Unlikely to be ghouls, demons or ghosts, by this assessment. The vampire theory was growing ever more likely. Sam grimaced at the turn of early afternoon, to a later, nearing evening light. If he wasn't quick enough, he would have to stow investigations for another day, and knew that would come at the cost of lives. He'd rather not let any more classmates disappear down the storm drains of monster activity. He had one more person on the short list of potential victims and relatives he had compiled before, and unfurled the yellowing note from his pocket with sweat-sticky fingers. Autumn in California was no joke. He treaded up the sun-baked streets to the cafe right outside his own apartment, where he had taken Daniel a handful of times in their short, just talking, phase. He was sure living together almost immediately after meeting could be considered brash, but he'd have expected a joke like that more in Charlie's Angels than about his own life. The barista in front of the huge, garish chalkboard fixed him with an uncomfortable glare from the moment he stepped into the buzzing space. He supposed it was 4 in the afternoon on a Monday outside of college. This would be more full than a morgue after Black Friday. Still, it unnerved him. As the sun caught her eyes, a glint like gold overtook one, and Sam had to blink until he regained normality. Not everything was a hunt, nor a yellow-eyed demon. He regained his composure, and slipped his eyes to her name tag, reading L. James. If the last name in his list, Lindsay, was one in the same, he may have an easier time of himself. He sauntered over the confidence he had only ever before mirrored with Dean, and slipped his hands into his canvas jacket, rolling his shoulders forwards, with a dainty tuck of his chin closer to his chest. Demure, non-threatening, smaller. These were the hunter's greatest assets against non-monster interrogations. Unless you were Dean, in which unsubtle flirtations and promises of intercourse were often the way to go, fulfilled or not. Hey, Lindsay, right? Some of my friends at the college said they knew you. How you were talking about a missing person, right? His voice felt strained, even to his own ears, but it had been a long day. He could forgive a shade of awkwardness. Yeah, that's me. Buddy, she said, face twisting in either confusion or discontent. It was a very universal signal of, back off, but he needed this information too strongly to leave so soon. It's just that your pal, Ramsey, right? Ramsey McDufftree? People have been saying he got pretty drunk a few nights ago, stumbled off down an alley near here and got lost. They haven't been able to find him since. You wouldn't know where that was, would you? It would be far from Sam's right to comment on someone else's appearance, with himself being one wrong choice from wearing Canadian tuxedos, but her overall look almost seemed. Nordic, in the Viking sense. She was almost preposterously pale for someone living so close to the southeast coast, with ivory white hair done on a low-hanging ponytail, braided with a smattering of fine plaits tucked close to her scalp. She almost reminded him of Shield Maiden, with a handful of dark freckles smudging her nose, thinking she was only some dark eyeshadow away from fighting on a longship or some battlefields. It was almost unnerving, like seeing a Roman warrior come to life. She narrowed gray eyes in his direction, and for a moment, Sam wondered sickeningly how that could ever reflect as the yellowish color he had seen not moments before she opened her mouth to respond. Over on the intersection between Cowper and Byron Street. I thought the cops would have checked there first, to be honest. Sam hadn't heard it come up in any of his investigations, and quickly shook his head at that. First he'd heard of it. She asked him, in quite a forward way, whether he had any business poking around in disappearances. Well, he stammered, stalling for time, everyone needs help, you know? And they can't always go through the standard channels. He turned to leave, parting with a quick, "Thank you, Lindsay," before a cold, iron grip grasped at his wrist. He turned around swiftly, and thought he had seen a flash again, now more bronze than yellow. He must have been hallucinating. "Stay careful, Sam." She had called to him like it was an important message, almost more so than the conversation they had been having previously. The sword swung over his shoulder, under the jacket, hung more heavily and chillingly at the words. He wrenched H.'s hand back, like it had been touched with a brand. "I will. I always am." He replied his piece quickly, turning to leave and stalking out of the cafe, before realizing he had never actually given the young woman his name to utilize against him. He made to re-enter the cafe, but, as far as he could see, she was gone, as fast as she had come. He squeezed his eyes tight, willing for the visions of something demonic to vanish from his sight. He still had the sword at his back. Even if he encountered trouble, he could handle it. "If it bleeds, you can kill it. If it bleeds, you can kill it," he repeated to himself, as if a mantra, and made his way surely towards Embarcadero Road between Cowper and Byron. He was sure there was a disused factory or large convenience store he had seen in that place between his walks to and from campus. He'd find those vampires before the sun even had a chance to set. It was nearly 4:30 by the time he arrived. At the building so far gone he thought it would be better to label it as a lot than any feasible human structure, but he had been wrong about the intended purpose. It was a disused nursery. He entered, slowly, the creak of the door, falling apart from its hinges, making a groan that even WD-40 couldn't fix. He made a startling mental realization that there was a non-zero possibility of not coming back from this one, being left to rot, and mingle with the garishly pink carpet as he decayed, fresh out of blood with no way of letting Daniel know what happened to him. Maybe he'd think he had walked out. It wasn't as if he had ever really left anything of his back at the apartment. At least he had paid the lease until the next Sunday in November. Slowly, he pulled the sword from the makeshift sling at his back, parting it from the scruffy material much as he would have expected Arthur to unsheath a gleaming blade, if he had ever done so in an abandoned preschool reeking of black mold. Not that he'd ever reach the same purity that seemed to be a prerequisite for that brand of heroism and legacy. He had known that fact since 4 years old. Swinging the ribbed blade in front of him readily, in slow, arching motions, he made his way through on pussy-footed stride, scanning for any potential areas where vampires could hide as they slumbered, feeling sickly like an extra in Salem's Lot. Surely it wasn't this creepy for Buffy, he contemplated, as he pushed over miniature, plastic desks and waded through what seemed like sandpits comprised of primarily discontinued 70s children's toys. He was sure at one point he even laid eyes on a Bobo doll, shuddering at the appearance, but thrilled with a small sense of humor remembering back to the compulsory psychology course as intrinsic to the beginning of his law degree. It was only after he pushed open a door with the tip of his blade, to what he assumed was a defunct caretaker's lounge, did he clap his sights on a pair of golden eyes. His mind screamed demon, even if nothing thus far had signified as such, and he swung his blade forwards, even if it would be useful against the assumed target. It was caught by a long, pale hand, scattered with tiny, pinprick freckles. He almost regained himself, before he heard footsteps behind him, and he smelt the terrible odor of cat piss and old sheets before he saw the figure, attempting to swing round, yanking his sword out of the shadowed hand in the process, coming to a draw with a man whose face he recognized, distinctly, catching the sharpened side of the sword deftly with the outer section of his arm, seeming unfazed despite the slashed fabric, looking back at him with ancient eyes. "What the fuck?" He barely got another word out before he took off, sprinting towards the exit. He had expected vampires, not whatever the fuck Twilight Zone kind of hellhole this was. A woman was standing at the entrance, raven-haired, speckled with silver at the base, with crow's feet marring small lines around her eyes, and arms crossed in a distinctly peeved fashion. Samuel, speaking of crow's feet, some were drifting down onto her shoulder, in a much more literal sense. Distinctly corvid wings preened themselves from a perch near her clavicle, and gazed at him with the same, hard eyes, glinting in a similar gold fashion as they caught the light. What the fuck, Professor Smalley? Oh, that's not actually my name. Back up, Sam shouted, as he inched backwards, almost stumbling into the short, Arab man that he had met a half-hour previously, and the one who had caught the blade he had sold him with nothing more than the skin of his forearm, and he whipped around, trying to keep all in focus, with the woman stepping further out of the shadows to reveal the gleaming name tag that had sent him down this path in the first place. Lindsay? What are you doing here? I thought you barely knew the area. Actually, not my name either, sport. Cool it, hot shot, you're going to get somebody killed with that thing, the short man said, soothingly, with a tinge of snark, going back to reach for the blade again before Sam thrust forwards with it slightly, in a threatening manner, backing up himself. His foot caught some misused old toy, squeaking dejectedly and brokenly beneath his foot like a caught rabbit. Hunters become the hunted, he thought, with disparaging realization. Who are you people? The vampires. Lindsay, did you lead me here to kill me? Sam was impressed by the level that his voice barely meandered around. He kept steady enough for dignity. Well, I'm Torvey, the professor of law at Stanford answered. Sculled, Lindsay, the cashier, said, raising her hand. Micah, the cashier said, as he shoved his hands into his pockets, with a slight, self-deprecating shrug. And, no, bro. If we wanted to, believe me, we would have. If we could, that is. I'm still not sure about all that. Sculled was cut off with a sharp hand from Torvey, raised into the air, and looked at his with her honey-colored, sharp eyes, which flashed golden again momentarily. No, Samuel. Nothing of the sort. You are safe with us. You have been sent here to greet us, so we can protect you until he arrives. The reports of our vampire infestation may have been greatly exaggerated, Micah said with the shit-eating grin that made Sam want to punch him. We're the seer, Samuel. Technically, Draugr, but that's a semantic I don't really want to touch. We're essentially spiritual practitioners, brought back with a purpose of protection. Currently, we have a small handful of people we're meant to look after. That is you. And the man we have invited you for. Torvey seemed at least nicer at breaking ice than the other two. Who? Sam yelled, brandishing the blade at the three. A voice, smooth as honey, spoke softly, but with an air of self-content and delightedness that didn't sit well with Sam, and he swung around, dropping his hold on the blade as the tip fell limply to his feet. Ended. Thank you dude, you've truly made all my efforts worthwhile. Have a great day.